Hello, one and all, to my live stream. Now, today I bet you're wondering what is happening, and I will tell you. Today, we are gonna be, I can't speak English, we are gonna be reading Silver Eyes, a nice Halloween story. Now, it's just me reading a story, so I don't know how entertaining that'll be. I'm already on chapter 4, or at the start of chapter 4, but I'm going to read up to that point, so I'm going to start over for you guys. So sit back, relax, curl up with a book maybe, or not a book, or if you have this book, maybe you can follow along, if you have it. If you don't, that's okay. So yeah, let's get started. He sees me. Chapter 1. Sorry. Chapter 1. I haven't read a book I haven't read aloud a book in a while. So we are reading Five Nights at Freddy's, The Silver Eyes, by Scott Cawthon, Kira Read Wisely. Yeah, sure. I can't read names, but that is fine. The Silver Eyes, blah, okay. Chapter 1. He sees me. Charlie dropped to her hands and knees. She wedged behind a row of arcade games, cramped in the crawl space between the consoles and the wall, tangled electrical cords and useless plugs strewn beneath her. She was concerned. She was cornered. I'm so sorry. She was cornered. The only way out was past the thing, and she wasn't fast enough to make it. She could see him stalking back and forth, catching flickers of movement through the gaps between the games. There was scarcely enough room to move, but she tried to crawl backwards. But caught on a cord, she stopped, contorting herself to carefully dislodge it. She heard the clash of metal on metal, and the farthest console rocked back against the wall. He hit it again, shattering the display, when he attacked the next, crashing against them, almost rhythmically, tearing through the machinery. Also my back. Machinery coming closer. I have to get out. I have to. The panicked thought was of no help. There was no way out. Excuse me. There was no way out. Her arm ached. She wanted to sob aloud. Blood soaked through the tattered bandage, and it seemed as though she could feel it draining out of her. The console, a few feet away, crashed against the wall, and Charlie flinched. He was getting closer. She could hear the grinding of gears and clicking of servos, ever louder. Eyes closed, she could still see the way he looked at her, still the matted fur and exposed metal beneath the synthetic flesh. Suddenly, the console in front of her was wrenched away. It toppled over, thrown over like a toy. The power cords beneath her hand and knees were yanked away. and Charlie slipped, almost falling. She caught herself and looked up just in time to see the downward swing of a hook. Welcome to Hurricane Utah. Charlie smiled wearily at the sign and kept on driving. The world didn't look any different from one side of the sign to the other, but she felt nervous anticipation. She felt a nervous anticipation as she passed it. She didn't recognize anything. Then again, she hadn't really expected to. Not this far at the edge of town where it was all a highway and empty space. She wondered she wondered what the others would look like. Who they were now. 10 years ago, they'd been best friends. And then it happened. And everything ended. At least for Charlie. She hadn't seen any of them since she was 7 years old. They had written all the time as kids, especially Marla, who wrote like she talked fast and incoherent. But as they got older, they had grown apart. The letters had grown further and further between, and the conversations leading up to this trip had been perfunctory and full of awkward pauses. Charlie repeated their names as though to reassure herself that she still remembered them. Marla, Jessica, Lamar, Carlton, John, and Michael. Michael was the reason for this trip, after all. It was 10 years since he died. 10 years since it happened. And now his parents wanted them all together for the dedication ceremony. They wanted all of his old friends there when they announced the scholarship they were creating in his name. Charlie knew it was a good thing to do, but the gathering still felt slightly macabre. She shivered and turned down the air conditioning, even though she knew it wasn't cold. And she drove into the town. As she drove into the town center, Charlie began to recognize things. A few stores, a few movie theaters, which was now advertising the summer blockbuster hit. She felt a brief moment of surprise, then smiled at herself. What did you expect? The whole place would be unchanged? A monument to the moment of your departure, frozen forever in July 1985? Well, that was exactly what she had expected. She looked at her watch, still had a few hours to kill before they all met up. She thought about going to the movie, but she knew what she really wanted to do. Charlie made a left turn and headed out of town. 10 minutes later, she pulled to a stop and got out. The house loomed up before her, its dark outline around in the bright, a wound in the in the bright blue sky. Charlie leaned back against the car, slightly dizzy. She took a moment to steady herself with deep breaths. She had known it would be here, an illicit look through her aunt's bank books. A few years before A few years before, it had told her that the mortgage was paid off and that Aunt Jen was still paying property taxes. It had only been 10 years. There was no reason it should have changed at all. Charlie climbed the steps slowly, taking in the peeling paint. The third stair still side of the porch. Oh, I read that backwards. Sorry. The third stair still had a loose board and the bushes had taken over one side of the porch. That makes more sense. There are thorns biting hungrily into the wood. The door was locked, but Charlie still had her key. She had never actually used it, and she took it from around her neck and slid it into the lock. She remembered her father putting its chain around her neck in case you ever need it. Well, she needed it now. The door opened easily, and Charlie looked around. She didn't remember much about the first couple of years here. She had been only 3 years old, and all the memories faded together into a blur, in the blur of a child's grief and loss, of not understanding why her mother had to go away, clinging to her father every moment, not trusting the world around her, unless he was there, unless she was holding tightly to him, burying herself in his flannel shirts and the smell of grease and hot metal and him. The stairs screeched, straight up in front of her. The stairs stretched. Sorry guys. Stairs stretched straight up in front of her, but she did not move directly to them. Instead, she went into the living room, where all the furniture was still in place. She had not really noticed it as a child, but the house was a little too large for the furniture they had. Things were spread out too widely in order to fill the space. The coffee table was too far from the couch to reach. The easy chair too far across the room to carry on a conversation. There was a dark stain in the wooden floorboards near the center of the room. Charlie stepped around it quickly and went to the kitchen, where the cupboards held only a few pots, pans, and dishes. Charlie had never felt a lack of anything as a child, but it seemed now that the unnecessary enormity of the house was a sort of apology, the attempt of a man who had lost so much to give his daughter what he could. He always had a way of overdoing whatever he did. The last time she was here, the house had been dark, and everything felt wrong. She was carried up the stairs to her bedroom, although she was 7 years old and could have gone quicker on her own 2 feet. But Aunt Jane on stopped on the front porch, picked her up, and carried her, shielding her face as though she was a baby in the glaring sun. In a room, Aunt Jen set Charlie down and closed the bedroom door behind them. She told her to pack her suitcase and hold on, guys. What? Sorry. Baby in the glaring sun. She told her to pack a suitcase, and Charlie had cried because of all the things she could never fit into that small case. We can come back for the rest later, Aunt Jen said. her impatience leaking through, and Charlie hovered indecisively, indecisively at her dresser, trying to decide which t-shirts to bring along. They'd never come back for the rest. Charlie mounted the stairs, heading to her old bedroom. The door was partially cracked, and as she opened it, she had a giddy feeling of displacement, as though her younger self might be sitting there amongst her toys, might look up and ask, "Charlie, who are you?" Charlie went in. Like the rest of the house, Freddy? Ah, ah. Hi. Thank you. Okay. So, like the rest of her house, her bedroom was untouched. The walls were pale pink. Hi, Teddy. What's up? It's okay. Come up. Oh boy. Okay. Like the rest of the house, her bedroom was untouched, pale pink. The ceiling, which sloped dramatically on one side to follow the line of the roof, was painted to match. Her old bed still stood against the wall beneath a large window. The mattress was still intact, though the sheets were gone. The window was cracked slightly open. A rotting lace curtain and rotting lace curtains wavered over the. Sorry, guys, I keep hearing things. Over the gentle breeze, wavered in the gentle breeze from outside. There was a dark water stain in the paint beneath the window where the water had gotten in over the years. Betraying the house's neglect, Charlie climbed onto the bed and forced the window shut. It obeyed with a screech, and Charlie stepped back and turned her attention to the rest of the room, her father's creations. To the rest, their first night in the house, Charlie had been afraid to sleep alone. She did not remember the night, but her father had told her about it often enough that the story had taken on the quality of a memory. She sat up and wailed until her father came to find her, until he scooped her up and held her in arms and promised her he would make sure she was never alone again. The next morning he took her by the hand and led her to the garage, where he set to work keeping that promise. The first of his inventions was a purple rabbit, now gray with age from years of sitting in the sunlight. Her father named him Theodore. He was the size of a 3-year-old child, her size at the time, and he had plush fur, shining eyes, and a dapper red bow tie. He didn't do much, only waved a hand, tilted his head to the side, and said in her father's voice, "I love you, Charlie." But it was enough to give her a night watcher, someone to keep her company. when she could not sleep. Right now, Theodore sat in a white wicker chair in the far corner of the room. Charlie waved at him, but not active. But not activated, he did not wave back. After Theodore, the toys got more complex. Some worked, some did not. Some seemed to have permanent glitches, while others simply did not appeal to Charlie's childish imagination. She knew her father took those back to his workshop and recycled them for parts, though she did not like to watch them be dismantled. But the ones that were kept, those she loved. They were here now, looking at her, expectingly, smiling. Charlie pushed a button beside her bed. Stifly, it gave way stiffly, but nothing happened. She pushed it again, holding it down longer, and this time, across the room, and and with the weary creak of metal on metal, the unicorn began to move. The unicorn Charlie had named Stanley for some reason she could no longer remember, was made of metal and had been painted glossy white. He turned around the room on a circular track, bobbing his head stiffly up and down. The track squealed and as Stanley rounded the corner and came to a stop the beside the bed. Um, you need. Charlie knelt beside him on the floor and patted his flank. His glossy paint was chipped and peeling, and his face had given over to rust. His eyes were lively, gazing out of the decay. You need the new coat of paint, Stanley, Charlie said. The unicorn stared ahead, unresponsive. The, at the foot of the bed, there was a wheel made of patched together metal. It had always reminded her of something she might find on a submarine. Charlie turned it. It was stuck for a moment, then gave way, rotating as it always did, and across the room, the smallest door swung open. Out sailed Ella on a track, a child-sized doll bearing a teacup and a saucer in her hand, in her tiny hands like an offering. Ella, Ella's plaid dress was still crisp, and her patent leather shoes still shone. Perhaps the closet had protected her from the damage of the damp. Charlie, I'm so sorry, guys. Hold on. I don't know why I'm so tired. Uh, the damage of the damp. Charlie had an identical outfit back when she and Ella were the same height. Hi, Ella, she said softly. As the wheel unwound, Ella retreated into the closet again. The door closing behind her. Charlie followed her. The closets have been built to align with the slant in the ceiling, with the slant of the ceiling. I'm sorry, guys. Okay, you know what? I'm too tired. Apparently, I'm way too tired to read. So I'm just gonna call it there. Halloween is in 3 hours, or trick-or-treating's in 3 hours, excuse me. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go get some lunch, pull my dog over. right there. Okay, so I'm gonna go get lunch. I hope you liked my read through, or at least as far as I got, because I'm apparently really tired. So I'm gonna go get some lunch and hopefully wake myself up. I hope you guys have a wonderful Halloween. Be safe when trick or treating. To you kids out there, be safe when trick or treating. And yeah, I love you guys as always, and I'll see you next video. Bye.